When it comes to creating animation, it's all about time. In After Effects, you can create animation with keyframes. Keyframes record the settings for a parameter at that specific point in time. Notice I didn't say frame. Since an After Effects comp can support multiple frame rates, each keyframe is set to a key point in time, regardless of the frame rate of that composition. To show you what I mean, we're going to animate the appearance of this Plus Sport logo over top of our background video. So in order to see how to add keyframes, we need to open up the triangle here on the left side of layer 1. That'll give you my transform options. If you don't see the transform options, just open up the triangle next to transform. Any parameter that has a stopwatch next to it is something that you can keyframe. So since I want to keyframe the appearance of this logo, what we'll do is have it slide into place. So we'll start with it off screen and then have it slide into where it exists currently. Now the easiest way to do this is to animate in reverse. So what I need to do is move my current time indicator down the timeline to where I'd like the logo to resolve in its current position. So let's move it down to 1 second in the timeline. We'll add a keyframe next to position. So go ahead and just click the stopwatch next to position. You know you've added a keyframe because you'll see this gold diamond over here in the timeline directly underneath your current time indicator. Also, you'll notice on the left side of the timeline we have a golden diamond as well. That's letting you know that the current time indicator is exactly on top of that specific keyframe. Now let's move our current time indicator back to the beginning of the composition, and I'm going to go ahead and just click on the logo and drag it back to the left. Notice as I start to drag, I get this line with dots on it. This line represents the animation that I've now started to create between the two frames. The dots are letting me know the velocity that my object is going to move between these two keyframes. So the further the dots are apart, the faster that object is going to move. Now let's drag it off to the left side of the comp, and then if you hold down shift as you drag it, it will make sure that it snaps along that X axis. Just make sure it moves off the edge of the page. Now notice this second keyframe was automatically added. Each time you add a keyframe to an individual parameter, After Effects will automatically add additional keyframes to that parameter. Since you already set one keyframe, now to navigate between the keyframes, go to the left side of the timeline. See, we have navigation arrows. So I can go ahead and click on the right arrow to move to the rightmost keyframe and the left arrow to move to the leftmost keyframe. Now in order to preview the animation, we need to go over to our preview panel and load up a RAM preview. Notice the green progress line in the timeline will load up, and then once we have a number of frames loaded in, all you have to do is press the spacebar and it will just load up a preview of the frames that you have already loaded in your RAM preview. So as you can see, we successfully animated the appearance of this logo. Now what if I want this logo to fade out? Well, let me press the spacebar to stop playback and just move my current time indicator to about 3 seconds in the timeline. Right here we'll have the logo fade out. So under the opacity setting, I'll just go ahead and click the stopwatch. Now we can move further down the timeline and then we can change the opacity parameter to add the second keyframe. So I'm just going to go and click and drag on that parameter. Now I've created a second keyframe. So if we scrub through the timeline, which is how I like to preview animations, you can see that my animation has been applied and my fade out has been applied. Now just as a general rule of thumb for basic housekeeping, if I have a layer that is at 0 opacity, I don't necessarily need to see it continually here in the timeline. So what I'm going to do is just click on the right side of that layer and drag it back towards the left. Now, just like we held shift when we were moving that object off the canvas, you can hold down shift and that layer will kind of snap to the current time indicator. So what I'm going to do is actually use my navigation arrow here, just next to my opacity keyframes, and move back to the last keyframe. And then here, go back to the right side of that layer and hold down shift as you drag, and it'll snap to end right at the second keyframe. So now we know the layer only exists when there's animation or when it's visible. This will also help you keep track of things when you have multiple layers in your composition. But as you can see, when you add keyframes in After Effects, you're not only recording an object-specific setting at that point of time, but you're also giving yourself the ability to navigate between the keyframes. If you ever decide that you need to change the keyframes or move them around, you can click directly on the keyframes. For example, if I want this move to happen more quickly, I'm going to click on my second keyframe here and just drag it back towards the left. As in drag it to the left, I want you to look in the upper right corner of the interface for the info panel. Notice here it's showing me exactly what frame I'm moving my keyframe to. Let's move it to frame 10. Now this will be a very quick slide in. If we load up another RAM preview and press the spacebar, you'll see it slides in very quickly, and then we have a slow fade out. Go ahead and press the spacebar to stop playback. So, as you can see, inside of After Effects, when it comes to adding keyframes, if you can see a stopwatch, you can create a keyframe. Not only are you recording that parameter at that specific point in time, but you're also allowing After Effects to automatically create keyframes anytime you move your current time indicator to a separate point in time, and then adjust that same parameter that you've already keyframed. After Effects will only add keyframes to parameters that have existing keyframes, unless you turn on auto keyframing, but that's something for a future movie.